Hello, I'm Frank Conkling, and this is Panda Consulting's ArcGIS workshop. And today we're going to talk about ArcGIS Pro 2.9 and some of the quality improvements that are in there and why you should consider using 2.9, especially if you're at a file geodatabase, and maybe if you're at an enterprise geodatabase. So before we go and do that, I just want to go over and remind everybody about Panda Consulting, how we're here. We are a professional services firm, and we're here to help you with your parcels. So more than anything that you might want to look at, you can go to our website and find it, including our events. If you go to our events page, you'll actually see them all listed as in a calendar view. If you're looking at them specifically and you want to know what's coming up, you can see them under our workshops and events page. And there we list them all chronologically, including all of those that have passed already, with ways that you can go and download and get the recordings of that. And that reminds me about our YouTube page. We actually do have a YouTube page. And if you click on the YouTube page, you go and you see all of our previous recordings. We now have 57 recordings out there. And we're watching and keeping track of what's being watched. And we're seeing several different things coming in, and they're keeping track of it and trying to make sure that whatever videos we give you and record and whatever workshops we go in and publish, we're looking at what you're looking at and hopefully helping you with this. All right, so today, what we want to do is we want to look at ArcGIS Pro 2.9, and there have been some changes in here, some significant changes in the way certain things are covered. Most of these are on not the parcels record-driven workflows, but on the quality-driven workflows. And just sort of a quick summary of this, if we go through here, on the quality tab, you will see things like parcel layers displays. You'll see highlight gaps and overlaps on here. You'll see some of the actual tools like merge boundaries and merge points, consistency checks, and maybe even a reconstruct boundaries component on here. So let's talk about this parcel layer display layers. This is an interesting one in which right now Esri has set this up for parcel layers. And what it does is it actually goes and creates a display layer for you. And you can create them for the connection lines in here, where you can say and demonstrate where there is a display mismatch. And we'll look at what display mismatch means, or whether it's too short, or whether you have extra vertices in there. And you can do that for your connection lines. You can also do that for your parcel lines. And again, it's the same sort of thing. You've got display mismatch, you've got line vertices, you've got whether or not it's too short or not. And then finally, in your parcel layers, you can look at vertices that you have on here. Now, these are display layer only. So let's take a look at these. So on here, here's just a parcel fabric I have, and this is all directly related to parcel fabrics. We have over here under the evaluation grouping, we have the parcel layers, and you can see display mismatch on your connection lines. And what this does when you create that, it actually brings up a new layer. And let's look and explore that layer a little bit. And it is in fact your parcel fabric layer, your connections layer structure. And it's got a definition query against it. What that definition query says, and let's make sure we look at the whole thing here, is that it says that the absolute distance minus the shape distance is greater than 0.5 plus 0.001 times the distance. So it's looking for differences between the actual shape length and what's actually defined on the distance field. It also is only looking at current connection lines. And what it really does, it doesn't matter whether it's a positive difference or not. It's looking at the absolute value of that when it's coming in here. If you also want to do it both just historic and current, you could make this definition query active instead of the other one to go and do this. But right now, just for the only current ones, there it is. And if you look at this and open it up, we can see whether or not there's anything that matches this. And in fact, we have in here, we have 303 individual lines where there's a mismatch in here. In this case, the mismatch between the connection line and what the line actually is drawn at is 0.9 feet on here. So how would you change that? You would go in there and possibly look at what the difference is on here and either remap it or correct the attribution on here. Let's go and zoom to another one and see. This is a mismatch of 6.78 feet. It almost, yeah, we've got a mismatch here of 1835. How are these? By the way, if you have a question, go ahead and put it over in the chat window. Chris is actually going and watching it, and he's monitoring it, and he'll go and interrupt me if in fact there's any questions on here. So a question that I might have in looking at this is like, well, how is this thing created? And I suspect that the way this is created is there's a connection line which is drawn and utilized for determining where the original point of beginning of a meets and bounds description is. Remember, connection lines are only used for meets and bounds descriptions, and it's the lines that go from your points of commencement to the point of beginning. It's to help you determine where that point of beginning is actually located. And the way this mismatch is probably occurring is that the editor probably went and input the values that are shown on the document and then took that and adjusted that to fit to the existing mapping in here. It's not that there's anything wrong on here. It just means that that's how it was created and how there's a difference between those that are on here. In this case, this one shows a distance of 14.08 feet. But if we look at the actual mapping underneath it, it says that this is actually 32 feet is what the underlying parcel has for that one segment in there. So again, they may have adjusted those connection lines to fit to the existing parcel data instead of remapping it or modifying those that are underlying there instead. Others, for example, this area right here, it might be in fact that there's some sort of a difference in here. And in this case, it looks like this was a curved line that was supposed to go through, but somehow it got modified into a straight line. And that this is not a curve, there's no radius on here. So it may be that that line was somehow corrupted. So just sort of to demonstrate how that actually is working and what that's actually doing. So Chris, I just saw, because it popped up on the corner of my eye,
Yes.
Kelly asked me a question. Go ahead and ask that.
When you say adjusted, are you referring to a least square adjustment?
So just to reiterate that, when I say adjustment, that doesn't necessarily mean a least squares adjustment. That means that that line has been created and somehow modified and adjusted, and that modification could occur in a couple different ways. It could be that that connection line in here, now let's go and create a connection line on here. Let's say just create a connection line in here, and let's give it some COGO values in here. Just make it 53, and let's make it 36 feet in length. All right. So we have something with some COGO values on here. When I say adjusted, it means that this line itself may have in fact been modified so that, for example, it may have been changed as far as this location, in which this might be here and this might be here. So it could be adjusted using either edit vertices, or it could be adjusted using align features, or any one of the alignment tools. There's align parcels, align features, there's edit vertices, there's reshape tools, any of those tools that change the original definition of this. That in fact could be what's happening. And if you note right now, I just went and created something, and it says there's a mismatch here of 10.63 feet on here because I adjusted my original connection line. Now, again, reminder that this thing works not just at connection lines, and that's what this data mismatch is. It's looking at the difference between what's stored on that line and what actually the shape length actually is. You also have the ability to do one called too short, in which it goes, and let's look at the definition query of it for the current ones, that the shape length is less than 1/2 foot long, meaning that you've got a connection line that's less than 1/2 foot in length. Now, these definition queries, they can be modified by you and say, well, let's make this a different definition for whether or not it's too short or not. But in reality, they're saying maybe you shouldn't have connection lines that are less than 1/2 foot on here. And that's what it's actually looking at, is and displaying those. So if I go in here, open up my attribute table, and it will show me that I've got 145 lines in this parcel fabric that are less than 1/2 foot in length. Are they valid? Don't know. And this one looks like it's along a curve, so it probably was some sort of densification that occurred. Not sure what this is here. Why that's showing up as too short. There's a mismatch here on here, but it does show up as being an issue with that. Interesting. That's not even a line that was created as part of a record. That looks like it was just some sort of a connection line that was drawn. So again, we've got a couple different ways of looking at both the connection lines. Your data mismatch is too short, or it's got extra vertices in here that are not, should not be in there. Or we could do the same thing with the parcel lines, in which we look at short parcel lines, and it will ask for the parcel type. In this case, I could tell it, look at the tax parcels, and let's open it up and see if we've got any tax parcels that are less than 1/2 foot in length. And we got 1,475. And some of these may be that they don't have COGO values on them, or purely that, let's go and look at one of these. It's also, to make it a little bit easier to look at it, let's make sure that we're showing our overall shape length on here. Let's go here. Make sure that we show our shape length. Interestingly, since these are display, there we go. Shape length, make them visible. And let's highlight it so we can actually see it. We can't save it because we have some edits in here still. Go and save those edits. And then let's go back here and save this out. Now, when we look at these two short tax parcel lines, it will show us our shape length field, and we can do a comparison and find out what it's actually analyzing. And there's the shape length. So it's actually the shape length that it's analyzing and determining how long that line actually is. And some of these are on densified curves. I suspect many of them will be on densified curves, which is what we're seeing here. So this allows us a way to go and identify where there's issues on here. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we've performed any sort of special adjustment that we were aware of, like a least squares adjustment, but just that something has changed and happened to this. We can go and look at this for, again, our connection lines or our parcel lines. We can analyze and say, show us the distance variance on our tax parcels, and it will bring up those tax parcel lines and allow us to go through and look at this. So the question we have is that, well, how do we use this? How is it going to make our looking at this and analyzing this any better when we go and do this? My suggestion right now is that, for example, the distance mismatch and the too short on here, to take and group them together and just sort of, tax variances on our tax lines on here. And Elise says, if the too short and or distance mismatch values are actually correct according to legal description, can they be marked as exceptions? Good question on here. So on here, can I match this as an exception on here? Because the reality is, this isn't a topology error. So these aren't errors that are created from that standpoint. Rather, this is just a way of viewing your lines and saying, take a look at this parcel and take a look at this line on this, and this matches a certain criteria. And that's what we want to make sure that we're aware of, is that these aren't necessarily creating any topology errors or attribute rule errors or any quote errors on here. This is a new way of viewing the features that you've created. And I can share with you that one of the things that I often will do is I'll also often look at the tax parcels, and I will go and copy my tax parcel lines and put them underneath my parcel grouping. And I'll do something like, if one of the variances I have is that it needs to have a name in the parcel field, I will edit the definition query of it to say that, and the name field can't be null. So if the name field is null, let it go and give me and show me another set of displays that will allow me to go and analyze quickly and identify things that are wrong inside of here. And I'll set this up for a single display and maybe go and use some sort of pink or something like that on here. Sorry, on here. Something like this. Say, okay, now this is my parcels that have no name on them. And I can tell you, I don't know whether there's any in here or not, but I'll go in here and I'll look at it. And sure enough, I've got 137 polygons that have no names on them. And so what are these polygons on here? I'll go in here and I'll zoom and I'll look, oh, there's a right of way that the customer didn't go and provide a name for this, or they forgot to go and put a name on there, or there might be a sliver or a triangle. There's something wrong here. So that this type of an approach to error identification, and I consider these errors, your polygon doesn't match the criteria of what it's supposed to be, whether your line distance and your line length is a mismatch, or it's less than a required criteria, or your polygon doesn't have something that it's supposed to have on there. These are ways that you can go and look at your features inside of your parcel fabric without necessarily causing there to be a whole bunch of other things on here. You know, one of the ways that you can look at this is we often will set up attribute rules to go and check and say, is there a value stored in this field? So that it's a constraint attribute field that says you have to have a name field, or that name field has to be 14 characters or 18 characters or whatever on there. And you could set that attribute rule to say, don't let you create that parcel if it doesn't meet this criteria. So what these layers, these display layers are doing is exactly the same thing. It's telling you it's not quite as onerous and not quite as in your face, and saying, these are my rules. This is what should be complied with, and display for me those ones that don't comply with it. Doesn't necessarily mean these are errors, because it might be something that you have in fact said, okay, I'll accept that. So at least to answer your question, there is no way to go and mark these as an error. These just means that it's not complying with this individual rule that you think should be part of your total overall parcel fabric. So it's a movement towards making a rule-based parcel fabric instead of just a graphical parcel fabric. You want to start looking and thinking about those features that you create as meeting a set of business rules. It has to be within a certain variance of what the distance is, or it has to have certain attribution on it, or it can't have additional points in here. Those are the things that you want to start thinking about to control the quality of your parcel fabric. So again, to go back here again, maybe these are the connection lines. I would go and group these as connection line, connection, to make sure that it's in full compliance with what I think of the rules are. And to set the rules, you can go into the individual layers here and set these properties and tell it what this rule should be. So you're displaying the differences in there. And that's really all these things are in this display layers. It's just looking at showing you a different view of the features that you've got in there. Again, one of the things that's really interesting once you get into the ArcGIS parcel fabric is because of the way the structures are set up, it allows you to start analyzing the information that's in there. It's not just a pretty picture anymore. It actually has ways that you can analyze the data, ways that you can figure out what's correct, what's not correct. The difference is Esri isn't necessarily telling you these are the rules that you need. You can define them yourself. So you can tell them that one of the rules is that every one of these attribute fields have to be filled in, or all of them have to be, all the lines have to meet a certain criteria. Another set of the rules, which by the way, we don't have in the parcel fabric. If we look at the parcel fabric itself, and then look at the, come on, look at the topology on here. If we look at topology of these rules, there is no rule that says you cannot have a gap or an overlap between parcels. It's up to the mapper to make sure that you have no gaps or overlaps between them. So what 2.9 provides is another tool here on gaps and overlaps. This is a very interesting tool. I happen to be using it in some of my beta testing, in that what it does is it allows you to go and identify what's the maximum width for a gap or an overlap. What's the largest point at which it's defined as a gap? And in this case, I've got 6 foot in there, meaning if I've got a spacing between two parcels and it's less than 6 feet, I want to look at it. I want to see that parcel to see what's going on there. And I can tell it what layer to look at, right? In this case, I'm looking at tax parcels, and I can tell it what color do I want a gap to show up as, and what color do I want an overlap to show up as? And I analyze these on a parcel by parcel basis. It does not use the topology engine. So there is no cracking and clustering and breakdown of your existing data, which is always a problem with the topology tool, is it goes and actually modifies your features. It puts vertices in there, analyzes them, cracks them, pulls them together on a very microscopic basis, but it does make those changes on here. What this tool does instead is looks at the polygons and determines, is there a difference between them? So let's look and see. Let me go over to a bookmark where I know that there actually is some in here. This is it here. All right. Let me also turn off these here, the variance, these other error layers, these display error layers that I've got coming on. I don't care about this one either. So what does this, again, I go to the quality, this highlight here. I'm going to tell it to go ahead and do this for my tax parcel layer. Anything greater than 6 foot, disregard. If it's smaller than 6 foot, show it to me, and then show me whether there's a gap or an overlap between them. And this is a toggle. If I say click and toggle it, what it's actually doing is, I zoom out just a little bit, it's giving me a dashed line saying that's the area that was analyzed. And in that analysis, what I had was I have one overlap. These are overlapping one another. And there's a gap here and a gap here. Doesn't look like it from viewing it, but if I go in here and analyze this and look in, zoom at this layer, sure enough, I've got a sliver in there. And I shouldn't say sliver. I've got a gap in there between the two. How do I fix it? And by the way, this is just a display. There are no features that are created or anything that's created. It's just displaying where there's a space between the two, displaying where there's an overlap between the two. And the only difference is the way those are analyzed, whether there's a gap or whether it's an overlap on here. So when I've got this, how do I fix something like this? Well, it turns out that in ArcGIS Pro, that's not a difficult fix. That's a fairly easy fix. One of the ways that we can do this, I'm just zooming out to an area where I can make it easier, is I can go and do an align features in here. All right, that align features, let's go and let's use 5 feet in here instead. And I can click here. I can come in here and click here. And then I can come in here and click here. And it will go and, since I'm saying allow aligning features without a selection, it will go in any vertices that are within those areas that I just drew, within that tolerance of that area, it's going to move them together. So I can go in and say, by the way, I want no topology on here. Let's draw this again. Here, here, to here, to here. Go ahead and line this up. When I align this and tell it to go ahead and highlight again, where there's a gap and overlap, you'll notice that that gap has disappeared on here. So in this case, I've got what looks like an overlap between these. And it's probably going to be right in the center, looking at the geometry here. Look at this. And that, by the way, is what a lot of people's data looks like. So what we're going to do is we're going to go and develop and utilize the Align Features tool and tell it to go ahead and align this up. Go ahead and analyze this again and actually fix that. Hopefully, if you were paying attention, you'll have a question here real close. I'm sort of holding off on that just to see if you have paid attention enough. I'll go ahead and do this one. Go ahead and do this and show you where it's fixing them. Do here to here. And then I'll come back to here, tell it to go ahead and fix this. And then go and check this again. And sure enough, it went and fixed that on there. Now, again, it only went and checked those areas in here. When I did that, I can go and tell it to go and check a larger area. Again, the dashed line represents the area that was validated as far as gaps and overlaps. And it will show me that, in fact, there is in this case, there is an overlap in here. Excuse me, a gap in there. I can go and use Align Features and have it go and fix that gap for me. So are there any questions regarding this tool? This is a really, really nice tool that was implemented, and it's implemented at 2.9. It does not use that topology engine. So I can zoom out here and have it go and highlight it, and it will highlight over 1,000. It will go and analyze over 1,000. It just takes a little while to go and do it on here. So there is no 1,000 record limit as far as being able to go and analyze it. It does take a while because it's actually analyzing all the features, all the polygon features in here to do this, but you can do it. Any questions on this yet?
None in the chat right now.
Okay. So let me go, Tori, thank you. A cool tool. Does it mean you should have road parcels again? Well, remember one of the things that I said on here, I'm gonna stop this. One of the things that I did here was I actually told it what the width is. So I told it a tolerance to say, if it's greater than 6 foot, that's not a gap between the two. So strategically, when you're using this tool, you might want to keep that maximum width to less than half of the smallest right-of-way width that you're going and analyzing. All right. This tool is really to go and identify gaps between adjacent polygons within that tolerance limit. And again, you can flip them between what records you do have available, whether it's conveyance divisions or tax polygons or subdivision polygons or whatever, and you can check them. It doesn't check everything all the time, so you can be very, very efficient in what you are actually analyzing on here for this. So again, let me get out of this, get out of my Align Features tool here, and go in here and say, I want to go and check my tax parcels have it go and check my tax parcels. There's my line that I see. It has checked, know that this area has none in there. But I might go and say, well, let me go and check the conveyance division parcels in here to see if they have any issues with them. And it looks like it doesn't have any in there for that. I might also go and look at my subdivision polygons and have it also go and do that analysis. And it doesn't look like there are any issues in here. So it's not necessarily something you're going to use on everything all the time, but it is something that you can very quickly go and analyze and see, do I have any gaps or overlaps between here? And there's no degradation of the data. It doesn't impact the data. It only points out where you've got problems in there. All right. Any other questions on that? All right, so let's go in here and look at some of the other issues. There's
I think
that.
Tori might have one more question.
Sorry,
Can you get a list?
no, it's only displays. That's all it is. It's just display. All right. Again, this is the first iteration of this that they're putting in here. Again, it's a cool tool, but it's not one of those things where it goes and creates a whole bunch of other things in here. It only is for this creating these display elements for you to display how to go and do this. If you want a list of it, you could always put in your topology rules, gaps and overlaps, and then run topology, but that becomes this whole big process. This is meant to be just give me a way to look at this without having to run through that whole process, without having me to do cracking and clustering, those sorts of things. All right, the next thing I want to do, I want to move on from that. By the way, that you can check it. You can also then go and clear those polygons that are shown without having to go and re-highlight it. You can just go and do it that on here. That's gaps and overlaps tab group on the quality tab on here. Again, really like what they've done on this. So the next tool I want to look at is some of these tools that they put in here to do cleanup afterwards. And those of us that have worked in the ArcMap parcel fabric know that there's a lot of issues with things like this, where there were little lines that were created either through misjoins, either through the densification that occurs when we happen to have a vertex in here when you brought lines in. And there's a couple tools in here that can fix those. There is, in fact, this merge boundary tools. This is like the old merge courses tools, in that I could go and select a series of lines. In this case, I can look at this and say that I have tax lines and I have conveyance division lines in here. That's what I have selected, tax lines and conveyance division lines. And this tool, what it does is basically removes intermediate vertices from those lines that you have selected. And you can run this against the entire database if you want it. I would not recommend you do that. But in this case, you have to identify the layer on which you're analyzing it, and then tell it the tolerance as far as how far off of this variation it needs to be before it will go and straighten it out. And basically, this is it. It's a merge collinear parcel boundaries. It looks at this variance in here, and if you've got a point which is so far away, if it's within that tolerance, it will go and straighten it out. All right. But if it's not, it will go and remove interim points in there. There's a couple things you want to watch out with here, and I'll point them out here. In this case, I have parcel lines and I have conveyance division lines, but there's actually a small segment to each of these lines, 1.35 feet, and the overall boundary is 121.83 feet. when I do this, it will go and analyze the selected lines and actually remove the boundaries on them, remove those boundaries on those lines. So if I look at my tax parcel lines, I now have here and here. Now what this has actually done is if I just say, just select this one line for me, it actually merged that line completely together because of this variance on here. Let me go ahead and remove that again. So it went and did that. Personally, I have an issue with this line for a couple, with these tools, with a couple of reasons. One, kind of does it, but I wind up with, for example, like I just had there, this polyline that was, it went north and then it went west, and it shouldn't have gone and pulled that together. Maybe adjusting and playing with this tolerance would have made a difference on it, but I want more control over this. Secondly, it did not calculate new COGO for me. So I would have to go in there and recalculate the COGO and then compare it to the source data to see whether or not it was in compliance. This next tool is called Merge Points. Now on this one, what it does is it analyzes the points that you have and gives you some options as far as where to go and which point to retain. And this is similar to the mean points tool in the old ArcMap parcel fabric. And it will go and look at the points that I have that I selected. And as I select them, you'll actually see it's going to modify and say, which point do I keep? And how do I modify the points and polygons that are associated with that point? And I can go and say, okay, this is the one I want. And I want you to go and remove that point that's south of here, 1.37 feet, and just be left with that one line, which it did, which I like, it's good. However, if I look at this, notice the dimension here. Notice when I redo this again, that dimension didn't change. It should have taken this and added it up to this. So just be aware that that merge points will not necessarily aggregate the lines. It will go and basically remove a point and redefine the lines as far as what they connect up to. I still use this a lot. I do have to remember that immediately after this, I have to go and do an update my COGO on this so that it updates the COGO and then get out of there. Again, I still have to go and compare it to my source document and make sure I haven't made any modifications that's outside that. But this is a really, really good tool to go and correct for all of these elements like in here. Now in here, I actually, let me go make sure that I build this extent to see, because I see an end of a line there that I don't see a point on. Let's build this extent to see what that was. Maybe that was a vertex. It might have been. So let's go and find another area where we've got 2 points or two. Here we go. This is another one of those things that I use this to clean this up every once in a while, where, all right, I can go and I've got, if I zoom in here, I can see I've got these areas that weren't joined correctly. So I will use this merge points and join those points up correctly. And again, I can choose, do I use this one where it's going to connect up and move this point over, or do I use this one where it's going to go and move the others? Since I have show preview, it allows me to go and do that. Also, another option is allow the removal of lines and polygons between merged points. So let's just merge this to here. Like it, it's a good tool. Well, I could actually use this to go and get rid of this sliver here by going and saying, well, let's look at this. That's actually where we want to go and modify this to. So let's go ahead and merge these points up. All right, so we'll merge, make sure that that polygon area between there, which could have been a gap or an overlap, it will allow me to clean it up. Then the question is, well, how do I clean this up here? Because I've got an overlap on here. Again, I will wind up using the Align Features tool to go and handle that. My parcels, where's my Align Features tool? Here it is. And use a variance like 10 feet. And I'll tell it to go ahead and merge them together or align it to there. All right, clear this out. And I can see that I have no more gaps there, that those are all coincident. And I've gotten rid of that little triangular area that's located in here. This workflow of looking and using merge points and using align features is a really good workflow for cleaning up your data. And I could have used the gaps and overlaps tool to identify whether or not these are gaps or overlaps on an individual layer. Oftentimes I'm looking at this and I'm analyzing it against multiple layers. And this tool, unfortunately, only works on one layer at a time. So again, this is just, I'm visually just looking through this to see what I've got in here. Do we have any questions at the moment for this on here?
Not currently, unless someone's typing in the chat at this very moment.
Yep. I'm either talking too fast or I'm not letting everybody else catch up to me. So again, merge points. This tool is really nice for going and cleaning things up. Again, for example, I'm going to clean this up. I think that this is not correct at one time, and it will show me. And it's interesting looking at this algorithm and testing it both in the beta testing and testing it now. If there's a control point, for example, stored here, it will use the control point first. If not, it will use a point that I'm not sure what the actual algorithm is as far as using and which one it's choosing to which you think it's going to be, but it's actually pretty good and identifies many times the real point that it wants to manage in here. Again, I would have to go back and clean that thing up. All right. Okay, I know we're coming up on the end of the hour here. There's a couple of more things in here. Let's go and see what I've got on my here. I've got my display layers, highlight gaps and overlaps, merge boundaries, merge points on here. There's always the consistency checks. This is what it actually goes and you select a series of lines and run a least squares analysis against it, and then it tells you where it thinks you've got problems with attribution. The difference is, up until this point, all of these, the display layer has to do with attribution between what the actual line element is, what that line feature is, and what's stored as far as the definition of it in the attribution. Highlight gaps and overlaps is analyzing the actual features and how they relate to one another on a single layer. The merge boundaries is looking at points, it's looking at vertices on a line and allows you to go and correct those vertices on that line. Merge points is looking at the actual points and allowing you to define how they're supposed to be fit together. You can merge points on some pretty big adjustments on here. So I could do a merge points here against this and tell it to go and completely remove that point on here. I need to hit that merge on here. I do need to remember that I have to adjust this definition as far as what that line is, or it's going to show up if I start analyzing the mismatch here. But you can go and clean interim points in here very easily. I'm surprised no one's asked, well, what about curves? And how does it deal with curves on here? I'm looking for a densified curve somewhere. Here we go. Okay, densified curves. One of the things you want to watch out for is you can use this for densified curves. I could actually go in here and use this to take all of these and tell it where to go and assemble all of these. You can see that it's actually here. But if you'll note, one of the things it will do is it will take all of those curves and redefine them to fit the endpoints, and it won't necessarily follow where it's drawn out. You want to watch out with this type of an analysis on a densified curve. When you use this against densified curve, it's going to go and change the geometry, not just removing vertices, but it's going to change the geometry of that curve. And just to sort of show you how that works, it will go and modify it, but you just want to be aware that it's modifying the geometry as well as modifying the vertices that are stored in the interim there. All right. The point was consistency checks. We'll take and analyze the attribution that's stored on the lines is what gets analyzed with a consistency check. It doesn't really look at the geometry. It only looks at the analysis that way. All right, there's something else coming up, just to let you know, and it hasn't been fully released out of beta, so I'm not going to show it to you. There's something called reconstruct parcels coming up. And what it allows you to do is it reconstructs the way the labels are placed on here, to whether or not you've got backlots. It will rebuild backlots on here. It's a really nice feature that's coming up, and hopefully on the next release, maybe even the next interim release, there'll be something there. I've seen someone else go and demo it out on a workshop, and it hasn't been released yet, so they should be very careful with this. Again, merge points tool. I like the way it works. It works really nice to do cleanup on here. All right, before we end this, I'm going to one more time. Any questions you'd like me to answer on any of these tools that I've shown you so far, or demo a little bit more on them? I'll be quiet for a couple minutes. Anything on here?
No requests in the chat.
Okay. With that, then, I'm going to go ahead and thank you all for coming. And hopefully you enjoyed and got something out of the workshop. We're going to stop the recordings and open it up for discussions afterwards. All right. Thank you. Thanks for attending, and we hope you enjoyed this workshop. If you have questions, would like some more details about anything we discussed during this workshop, or if you or anyone at your organization would like information about training, support, or ways in which we can help you with your GIS needs, please contact me at frank@pandaconsulting.com or call me at 561-691-3277, and we can discuss how we can help you with your needs.